Friedberg, how did YouTube do it so well?
YouTube was a very different situation. Google basically took a team of 24 people, and their infrastructure was terrible. And they basically rebuilt the entire company. So it was the complete opposite. Think about them taking the front end shell of YouTube, and then they rebuilt everything underneath it, ran it, and then they actually put their own people in to optimize the front end. They put their own ad sales team on top of it. I mean, they just bought the skeleton of a growth engine, and they built everything. And so it was a very different story. And the one thing that the one thing that Google did so well with that acquisition was the conviction bet that they made on the business. And they made billions and billions of dollars of investments into that business for years before it started to make money. And that is a very hard thing to do, because to Chamat's point, you often have this question of where are your free cash flows, where's your dividends, where's your buybacks as a business gets to a certain point of maturity. But what Google had that many businesses of that scale have never had before is their extraordinary growth rate that continued even as they were of that scale. So the leeway that Google's executives and board were given by shareholders was extraordinary, not to mention the dual voting, where Larry and Sergey could decide to do whatever the heck they wanted. But they really were able to take advantage of their high growth rate to take all this cash they were generating and reinvest it into this YouTube platform, as well as many other things, many of which haven't worked out. But when they do work out, you have a business that I think YouTube's probably worth, what, 300, 400, 500 billion dollars at this point? And it's really paid back multiples. So YouTube's really a one-off, because it's a one-off acquirer, and it was a one-off kind of acquisition integration scenario that we haven't seen before.
What Google, in effect, got when they acquired YouTube was a flywheel. I mean, it was a brand and it was a network effect.
A network effect.
Yeah, the network effect was massive. It was off to the races. And I remember Google had Google videos, but they just couldn't come close to catching YouTube, because the flywheel of creators wanting to be where all the viewers were and viewers wanting to be where the most content was, it was just impossible to catch. But that organization was relatively tiny at the time it was acquired, and it didn't have any monetization. And it was being deluged. It was being deluged by legal problems that Google Legal could solve.
Very unique situation, yeah. That was one of the bold acquisitions of all time.
But what was incredible is right after the acquisition and Google started to scale this thing, most of the content being watched on YouTube was copyright content. And I was at a conference, and I remember Philippe Damon, the CEO of Viacom, stood up, and Larry Page and Eric, or Larry and Sergey, or someone was on stage and he yelled at them, and he was like, "You guys are making all this money and growing this YouTube business off of the back of our content." And the DMCA, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, says that someone can file a takedown notice, and then the platform has a period of time to respond and to deal with it. And the amount of time it was taking them to deal with it, new content was being uploaded, and then they'd have to file another takedown notice. So it created this insurmountable, copyright thing. And then what did Google do that YouTube would have never been able to do, to Sachs's point? They built an engine that could automatically recognize copyright content and pull it down before it was made publicly available,
the fingerprint,
without ruining the user experience of instant upload and availability of content for other
content. The fingerprint system was even more nuanced than that. The fingerprint system not only told them, hey, this is an SNL skit or this is a music video from Prince. It said, what would you like to do? And it put the power in their hands and said, turn it off, claim it, and we get the money from it. And then it was like, well, we're telling you before you even know about it. And what all these people did was they say, okay, yeah, you can make a remix of my Prince song or this episode of a TV show. We'll collect the money. And that
revenue
was just,
share, yeah.
The revenue share was the brilliant part about it, because it put the power in the copyright holders' names.
This just speaks to how singular and unique that deal was, because I don't think any other company at that time, maybe Microsoft, would have been able to develop technology to do this and do it at this scale and do it with this low latency and high speed for users and so on. It really was a singular transaction.
Which Friedberg, I think, speaks to their accumulation of talent, especially in those early years where they were just like, hire smart people, we'll figure out what to do with them later. They actually had those people sitting around who could just go jump on the YouTube team.
Oh my God, okay. Salar Kamangar went and ran YouTube and absolutely crushed it. Probably one of the best CEO runs that's never talked about in the history of tech. He stepped in and he ran YouTube, and now Susan runs it. Another incredible run and monetizing that thing since. But I mean, and these are people, by the way, both Salar and Susan were sub 30 employee people at Google. So yeah, good point.
Nick, can we throw up the slide contrasting valuation to ARR? this is actually more interesting than just who made all the money. So I actually created a plot. ARR is the red chart, and it's the right axis. So as we talked about, they're at around 450 million of ARR right now. And then the left axis is expected value. Basically, this was their valuation. And it's in purple, and it goes up to the 20 billion or 22 billion that Adobe just paid. You could see E was the last round they did in 2021, where they were valued at 10 billion. Before that, they were valued at 2 billion in 2020. And then, the Series C, I think they were valued at like 440 million or something like that. And then I think the B, they were valued at like 125 million. And then the A, they were valued at like 50-ish million, and then there was seed and so forth. I think what you see here is how efficient, in a way, venture capital is, where it's tracking just slightly ahead of ARR. It is predicting where the hockey stick is going. So first of all, look at ARR. It is as close to a pure hockey stick as I've ever seen in SaaS. Kudos to them. I mean, the crazy thing is just how long it took for the hockey stick to get going. Normally,
why didn't you invest in this company? Did you see it?
Well, no, we didn't see it. Also, look at what a late bloomer this thing is. That's
you
incredible, have to kind of see it. Look, like hockey stick didn't really start inflecting until 2018, 2019, right?
Yeah.
So
what's more, that your table is more striking, where these guys for years were toiling away, and then all of a sudden this thing just took off, right? It's really incredible.
This was such a late bloomer, and for anyone who's doing a SaaS company and you're in it 5 years and you still have zero revenue. And like, that doesn't mean you're dead. I mean, they basically were a zero for 5 years.
Grinding, exactly.
Absolutely nothing. And now it's a $20 billion exit 5 years later. I think the only hard round to invest in this company would have been if you were going to invest in, I think, the 2014 time period, 2015, because you were investing in a company that hadn't even launched yet, that had been grinding for 3 or 4 years. By the way, the founder was like 19 when he started this. He was a Teal Fellow. He was one of the first, 20 under 20 Teal Fellows.
Was he really? Wow.
Yeah. And he dropped out of school to do this. And, and they spent several years in the wilderness. I think that's when it would have been hard to invest, is maybe not the first seed round, because you could tell this guy was brilliant. He had a really specific idea. Moving design tools to the cloud was, I think, like a very clear and sensible vision, clear, why now underlying trend.
Yeah, I always say my 3 biggest traits for entrepreneurial success, one of them is grit. I mean, if you have a high index on grit, you're able to grind your way there. That's a really incredible story.
This chart is brilliant because, what we see in the seed stage is right before that Series A is where most people give up, Sachs. You get 3 or 4 years in, people aren't paying for the products, you're under-resourced, and they don't get the A, and they got that 2013, 14, 15 period, they were probably trying to get an A. It might have taken them 2 years to get the A. And then somebody finally decided.
It's so easy for a young person to give up and go get a friggin' job at Google or go back to school and to grind it out, to have the grit and the persistence and commit to your vision. He didn't pivot away. He persisted and he executed and he iterated. He clarified, right?
Yeah.
But he didn't go 5 steps away and say, hey, I'm going to do a new startup and
no, there was
he iterated
no pivot.
his business, right? And
there's no pivot here, yeah. Dylan Field, by the way, is the founder. I had him on the pod back in the day, and really the ultimate customer focus, customer obsession, like you said, that wins.
Enterprise SaaS, you need to just have your pulse on what your customers are saying constantly, because the answer is there. You just have to develop it and give it to them.
By the way, also in this chart, that's I think very interesting, Sachs. I'm interested in your position on this. If you look at this chart one more time, they could have turned on monetization, I think, a year or two before they did. So they purposely didn't charge for it to get the network effects going. I would love to see in here the number of users as a third vector, as a third line on here, because I think they started getting a lot of users in 2014, 2015, 2016. That's why they got the seed, but they purposely did not charge to let the network effect.
Yeah, 2015 was a private beta. I don't think they were even had a product in 2014 that was usable yet. 2015 was private beta. 2016 was public launch. And then they turned on monetization in 2017, and then they turned on enterprise pricing in 2018. So I think that's a pretty sound progression. To be honest, I'm not a big fan of taking 3 or 4 years in the wilderness to build your product. I think you need to get to market sooner. But I do think it is a little different in an existing industry where the table stakes are high. So, Adobe is not a cloud-based product, but those were very rich client products. And so to get to the point where you could even compete with them with the classic Clay Christensen Innovator's Dilemma lightweight version of the product, there were significant table stakes there. And it was a significant technical challenge to move design tools into the browser. They had to do a lot of cutting edge browser tech.
The browser wasn't ready for it. Yeah.
This chart is going to be call-in a few years.
Can we talk about now that I'm doing after all in 48 hours after it? I think that's correct.